we spent 2 or 3 years arguing. People have different worldviews, and we still argue to this day. But it's a very positive process. We've learned each other's language. We throw out hypotheses to one another. We argue about those hypotheses. We collect the data, and then we say, let's go to the data and see whose orientation is right about this. But I consider this a gift to have had this experience. And I could not have done it without convening this transdisciplinary team of people who are willing to give their time and some of their resources to make this happen. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the populations who were involved in this research. I'm going to tell you about some of the community partnerships which made this research possible. The idea of collecting DNA samples from rural African Americans when there's the history of the specter of the Tuskegee experiment in the background is not easy. How did we do that? I'm going to tell you about a first study, and then I'm going to see whether we could replicate that study with another design. That's how we'll spend our time during the next 50 minutes or so. So I want to first thank the people who were kind enough to sponsor the research I'm going to talk about today. And without support from these folks, this work could not have been done. It's very labor intensive at many, many levels. So we do our work in the state of Georgia. And we think we have a better football team than you do, but oh well. But one characteristic of Georgia is that it has more counties than any other state in the union. And that's really not by accident. All of these counties are and were political fiefdoms, and they are vestiges of the old plantation system. That has its real disadvantages in terms of overlap of services, and it's not very efficient. But in many of these counties that we work in would be considered persistent poverty counties. People there don't make a lot of money. There's not a lot of amenities or services, and there are things missing there that we all take for granted. Uh-oh. Oh, let's go back. So here's some characteristics of these places. The African American population in these places is 49%. You can see that the poverty rates are pretty high. People are not making very much money. It would be hard to live like a student, let alone rearing a family on the amount of income that these households have. There are high rates of moms in particular rearing families, and the unemployment rates are very high. And I have to tell you that the unemployment rates have only gotten higher in these places in the last 6 months. Another characteristic of these families that I want to share with you is that the primary caregivers in these families are working 39 hours a week, yet the poverty rates are very high. 25% of these families live within 150% of poverty. So people are working multiple jobs, and they are working in industries where they are paid very little and are working very hard. So these are very industrious people trying to rear families in very challenging circumstances. back in 1987, when we first started doing this work, it became apparent that we could not be at the University of Georgia, and I would venture, or the University of South Florida, and go into rural communities to study rural African American populations. It just wouldn't work. So back in 1987, we started community partnerships, and they exist to this day, and we have persons who are called community liaisons, and community liaisons are a person in each county we work in. In some counties, we have more than one community liaison. They are African American community members who serve as a bridge between our center and the community, and they are responsible for why our retention rates are so high, why we do pretty well in recruiting families into studies, and then having families participate in preventative interventions. Right now we're doing a trial with 500 families in persistent poverty counties in middle Georgia. 89% of the families contacted enrolled in the study, and 80% of that 89% are attending the intervention. And that's remarkable, and it's because of the great work that the staff at the center and the community liaisons do. Schools have been great supporters of us. When we go to do a trial, we get lists of students at the school, which we randomly select from. We've got prevention programs going on in churches, and the Cooperative Extension Service have been very supportive of our efforts, and we're starting a trial where we're embedding our interventions into the Cooperative Extension Service for dissemination throughout Georgia. It takes a village, and without all of these partnerships, which take a long time to develop, we couldn't be doing any of the work that Velma and I are going to talk to you about today. So, we got the bright idea of wanting to study genetic risks and protective processes which might override those risks. And I'm all excited about this, and I go to the staff at the Center for Family Research. And the staff at the Center for Family Research says, no way. We are not going to start collecting DNA from our community members. The community will not agree to go along with that. This is a non-starter. And when the staff speaks, we listen. So what we did is we shut it down. After having done a lot of work, it was obvious that if the staff was not on board, this was a non-starter. And so what we did is we started convening focus groups of staff members who aired their concerns, and their concerns had to do with the vestiges of Tuskegee, their concern that there would be some violation of personal information. When you get people's DNA, it could link them to all kinds of activities. They were concerned about that. And then they were concerned about, wait a second, this has been a place where we examine what are the processes that allow people to raise healthy kids despite living in very stressful environments. Why are we changing? What is this all about? After about 3 months of focus groups, after all of us getting informed about collecting DNA and why it was important for African American populations to get involved in this research, and that information came primarily from the work that had been done at Howard University, the staff came around and they said, okay, let's do focus groups with the community. So we convened focus groups with African American parents and African American youth, and we started talking about this. And here's the concerns from the community. People in the community wanted to know, what are you going to ask me to do? how are you going to get my DNA?